Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, Episode 4. All right, welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, Episode 4. Thank you for joining the Patreon. And today, what I want to talk about is a question that I want you to be thinking about, because I think it's very important for yourself, for your writing, and honestly for your life in the long term. And that question is, what does an independent thinker look like? What does somebody who is actually thinking on their own, making their own decisions, taking their own action without following someone else or completely following someone else's guidelines blindly? What does an independent thinker look like? And then from that question, there's another question, which is, do you think you're an independent thinker? Do you think that you, as somebody who is trying to be a writer, as somebody who is interested in writing and in storytelling, do you think you are someone who legitimately does their own thinking, comes to their own conclusions, and makes their own choices? Or do you think you are predominantly, do you think you make your choices based upon what other people want you to make? Or do you make your choices based upon what you have always believed, without ever questioning those beliefs? So this is a really important question, because I think that it comes down to the core of how you will eventually become a strong writer, right? One of the ways that you are actually going to break away and make something original, people like to talk about originality and about, making something different. One of the ways you're going to do that is by actually becoming an independent thinker, somebody who's doing their own thinking and then creating stories based upon that work. A lot of times people look at, something like originality, and they think that comes down to a concept, right? They think they can create a particular sci-fi concept or something like that, and then suddenly they have an original story. I just don't think that's how this works at all. I think that you are going to be the most original when you're able to actually do your own thinking. And when you can actually go through the process of developing your own viewpoint. Now, obviously, your viewpoint is going to be a culmination of multiple people that you are interested in, books you have read. Different people have different points of view about how life should be lived, how you should operate, morality, philosophy, the actions you should take. Of course, you're going to find all sorts of people who are going to be able to give you their opinion on that. But not only do you look at that, you also go with your own learned experience, right? You have your own perception of the world. And so you have to look at that perception of the world and say, do the things that I believe line up with my perception of the world, right? And how much can I rely on my own perception of reality to then create my own belief system and my own thought process? And ultimately the actions that you take, and then the stories that you create and then give to other people. Because what a story is you giving someone else your viewpoint, right? So you ingest viewpoints of others. Ideally, you think critically about that. You compare what you are learning to your own experience, and then you come out of that with a stronger, more developed viewpoint. I think this really comes down to, what does thinking differently really look like, right? It's hard to think about that because some people can be critical thinkers and they still aren't independent thinkers, right? Like, you can be a rational thinker, or you can think critically. You can be good at reasoning your way through a particular argument. But being able to reason your way through a particular argument is not the same as forming your own, truly forming your own opinions on a particular point of view or a particular philosophy, or just, creating that viewpoint and worldview of how life should be lived. And I think it's important to realize what the difference is between critical thinking and independent thinking. And so if you're confused about what I mean by this, one of the greatest or one of the most important things that I heard a while ago, it was in Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. And Peter Thiel, if you don't know, he was an early investor in Facebook. He also was one of the creators of PayPal. Kind of an odd person, done a lot of interesting things. One of the things that I took from him was he had this question, and he said that he used it a lot in interviews to start to see if the people he was trying to hire were able to form their own viewpoint and their own opinion on certain topics. And that question was, what important truth do very few people agree with you on? Right? What important truth do very few people agree with you on? Right? I think another way to phrase this is, what is something that you believe that almost no one else around you believes, or no one else generally believes? Do you have any beliefs that you can point to where most people around you do not agree with you? Right? And I think that if that particular belief is larger, then that's actually more and more interesting, right? And I'm not talking about having an opinion on something small or trivial, right? What is something that you believe on a philosophical or psychological or worldview level that most of the people around you do not believe or do not agree with you on? And if take some time to think about this, because I remember when I first heard this, I think it was a few years ago, I took some time to think about it, and I was like, man, I don't really think there's that many things that I don't agree with, the most people around me on generally, or, a majority of the people, or at least 30 or 40% of the people around me and in my country believe. And I was like, that's really interesting. I don't think I have that developed of a worldview. I don't have that developed of a mind, right? And so I want you to think about that. And I want you to use that to explore new ideas, right? I want you to read philosophy books. I want you to read psychology. I want you to read interesting stories, novels, watch interesting or weird movies. Not just because you're trying to develop some sort of contrarian point of view to be cool or to be interesting. The idea is to actually train your own mind to think independently and to not just ingest the worldviews of the people around you without questioning them. Because when you can start legitimately questioning the worldviews that are around you, that's going to create a situation where you can actually create some really impactful stories. I think if you look back in history, and if you look back in impactful stories that really were impactful to a society and made people think and made them question their reality, most of those writers were not in line with their own culture, right? Part of great writing is being counter to your culture, in the sense of counter to the dominant thought processes of your culture and of your time, right? Because the idea, I would say, of a great story or something like that where it's on a cultural level going to be impactful is that it is showing some sort of blind spot or problem with the current cultural thought process, right? And we all live in a culture. We all have rules and worldviews and beliefs that exist within a particular culture. We all have moral views. We have views on morality, what's right, what's wrong. We have views on what religion is correct or incorrect, or we have views on just how life should be lived, how you should operate as a person, how you believe other people should operate as a person, or as people. And that does impact a lot of what you do. And I think that if you don't actually spend the time to become an independent thinker and think critically about what you believe and spend time developing that viewpoint, then it's going to be very difficult for you to, one, be a person of note, really, in any way, and two, be a great storyteller. You can't just sit around and focus on 12-point structure. At some point, you have to think, At some point, you have to think about your reality and then how you can communicate how you are seeing the world through storytelling. One thing that I think about this is kind of interesting because this is something that I learned more about as I was studying the craft of storytelling, but then I realized it really works back and does apply to my life and my reality, is that, and that is that beliefs don't matter unless they are tested, right? Beliefs don't matter unless they are tested. If you are holding a particular belief, but you never actually have to make a choice that either denies or confirms that belief, then you can't truly know what you actually believe, right? Like, let me put it this way. You may believe that murder is wrong, but you also probably have never been in a situation where you might have to murder somebody. You have the choice to murder somebody. And there's legitimate reasons, whatever those may be, to take someone else's life. And so you essentially this is a very, very, very simplistic version of what I'm talking about, but the point remains the same. You are walking around with an untested belief. The choice has never been presented to you whether or not you should murder someone. And so how can you truly know what you would do in that given situation? This is part of the reason that people actually benefit from suffering and chaos in the world. Because when there is suffering, you have to decide what you believe. When things are bad, you have to decide what you are going to do about it. If you disagree with a government, let's say, if you're living in a nation with a tyrannical government, at some point you have to make a decision and say, okay, well, I said I was this. I said I believed in these things, but my actions show that when push comes to shove, I'm going to lay down and just take this, and I'm not going to, fight back. Or you do fight back against a tyrannical government, and you do what it takes to, gain freedom or change the system, And so that's an example of somebody having to actually test their beliefs. And so I think what happens, especially in many parts of Western culture, in many first world countries, we don't have to really make these tough decisions a lot of the time. And, that's also relative. So certain decisions are tough. There's a lot of relativity here. But the point is, there's a lot of core beliefs you hold, right? Religious beliefs, political beliefs, moral beliefs, a lot of core beliefs you hold that you have never actually been in a situation where you have had to see whether or not that's something you believe or something you're just holding in your mind as what people should do. And I think it's important to realize the difference there. Because this comes back to this idea of independent thinking. You will have a much stronger ability to make the choice that is in line with your real beliefs if you do the work to figure out what you actually believe as an independent person, as a person that is doing their own critical thinking and not relying on someone else to think for them. Because then you can be in a hard situation and make the right call because you know that you've thought about this already. And you know that you can accept the consequences of a particular decision, right? All decisions have consequences. You just get to pick your consequences. And so I think that really, it's important to understand that this whole idea of self-awareness kind of wraps up with this as well, right? Where you have to understand where you get your own beliefs from. And part of self-awareness, part of personal awareness, is realizing that it is essentially tracing back the beliefs that you hold, right? That is partially what people do in, counseling when they have trauma from past experiences. The idea is that you're tracing back a bad belief, figuring out what caused that bad belief, and then essentially reverse engineering your own mind to believe something differently. And, you can do that without the trauma. You can do that to develop your own mind. You can do that to develop your own worldview. And the more you're able to do that, the more you're able to articulate yourself better. And then when you do the work of critical thinking and independent thinking, and then you do the work of articulating yourself correctly, then it becomes very, very, very easy to become a good storyteller, right? I think one thing that happens is that we like to use all of these books about story structure and characters and whatever. We like to use these books about the craft of screenwriting or the craft of storytelling to hide behind the fact that we're not developing our own independent thinking. And I think that what you could say is, I think that certain writers that a lot of people would look at and say, oh, they're very much an organic writer, right? They're not having to read all these screenwriting books and figure out structure and do all this stuff. They just write well, and they're very organic in the sense of how they write. A lot of that comes down to, I believe, because they've done a lot of work becoming independent thinkers. They have done a lot of thinking on their own. They have traced back where their beliefs come from. They have decided what they really think about things. And just doing that work, doing that mental work, really does translate over into your writing. Because you are able to essentially get to the core of storytelling, which is communicating specific ideas to other people in a very human way, without having to do all of this, rule work. Now, for me, I don't really think I'm I'm not really an organic writer. I don't really think I'm very organic at many things. I think one of my strong suits is I think I'm fantastic at analyzing, and I am fantastic at applying information I learn. So I think that's also part of why I am good at communicating some of these core storytelling ideas, and why people have benefited from my YouTube channel and from my course is because I'm really good at analyzing what something is and why it works a certain way, and then communicating that to somebody else. Because I have to do that for myself. I'm not like a Quentin Tarantino type of person where he's an extremely organic writer. He if you listen to him talk, and you listen to interviews, he will talk about how he doesn't like screenwriting books. He doesn't like how people teach screenwriting, and he doesn't like any of that. And I understand, because a lot of what he says makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of wrong things happening in film schools. But there's also an element of Quentin Tarantino that it's just the fact that he is good at organically writing, because I think that he's just good at thinking. Maybe he's not. I don't know. I can't see into his mind. But I think there is a correlation there between people who are organically good at writing and people who are very strong independent thinkers. And, just like anything, just like I've talked about before on this podcast, thinking is a skill. And you can get better at thinking with intention and time. It is a skill. And, I think I have done some work to develop that in myself. and I've done reading, and obviously, that continues. There's not an end to that process. But I do think what I have found is interesting is I think when you are beginning that process, right? When you finally take the time and you say, okay, I'm going to seek out information, I'm going to seek out knowledge, I'm going to seek out these different worldviews, and I'm going to start thinking about how that relates to what I think. I think the very beginning of that phase is so much fun, honestly, because you are going through this for the first time and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much information that I didn't know was out there. All of these facts exist, That's one thing, like history in and of itself is so fascinating. Where's this book at? It's sitting over here. It's just out of reach. I can't grab it. But it's this book called The Devil's Chessboard. And it's about Alan Dulles and the CIA and, what he was doing and all of this stuff. And it's a really fascinating book about, the history of this person and his role in, America and the globe. And when I was reading this book, it was just interesting because it's just this entirely different viewpoint on history, right? Like you look at what some of these people do and you realize, oh wait, my view on this is wrong. My view on how some of the world works is incorrect. And that's really fun, I think. Because you really get to spend some time, figuring out, because what it does is it sends you back to this place when you're like, well, what else don't I know? And being in a place of what else don't I know is really interesting, and it's really fun. And I think it allows you to be open-minded when you can be in that. I don't know who it was. It was one of the philosophers. Maybe it was Aristotle. I don't know. They kind of blend together, honestly. But one of them was like, I know one thing that I don't know anything, or something like that. And I think that being in that mindset can definitely be fun and interesting, and you can definitely soak in more information that way. And so, that's what I would, I don't even, I tell people to start with philosophy and psychology, because that's really such a baseline and so applicable to storytelling, where I'm just like, it makes a lot of sense for people to start there and to be looking at those categories. But like, you don't have to just stay there or even start there, Find categories of things that are interesting to you, To believe that there's nothing valuable to storytelling or valuable to your own critical thinking to be found in these other areas of study is just, totally not true, and I would never say that. But philosophy and psychology are so primary to storytelling that it's not a bad place to start, And so, I really think I spend some time thinking about that. What important truth, do you have any truths, any worldviews, or any points of views where very few people agree with you on that point of view? Where most people do not agree, right? Is there anything you believe that only a small few people around you believe? And if you can't think of any, and truly, right? Because I think some people will lie to themselves and say, oh yeah, nobody believes this, when in reality most people believe that thing. But be honest with yourself, right? Because it's not it doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means that you have some work to do, It just means that you're developing as a storyteller and as an independent thinker. And, everybody's going to be on a stage of that journey. Many people never get on that journey. Most people don't ever get on that journey. So to even realize that you can start down that, I think is insanely valuable. And so that's what I want to leave you with today. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week.